Welcome to Buffalo Gameday Recap. I'm Thad Brown along with AJ Feldman, and boy, do we have a lot to get to from Bills and Texans 23-20. AJ, the first really fun game of the year. I guess the Cardinals game was fun. This game was really fun. Not if you're a Bills fan, obviously, but you and I cover the team, so we could just get to enjoy close, fun discussion, strategy-filled games. And AJ, real quick though, give me your reaction when it comes to how this loss fits in with the Bills, not maybe entire season big picture, but kind of, what your reaction was to 23-20, a loss, not necessarily how it happened.
I think maybe the biggest thing I'm thinking after the game was, wow, Stefon Diggs somehow wasn't storyline A.
Or B or C.
Yeah, we're not almost even talking about Stefon Diggs. Yeah, he said some stuff in the locker room about wanting to win, but yeah, sure, fine. We knew he wanted to win, but so much happened late in the game. The offense looked so bad at times, and for most of the game, that there are so many things to talk about. That Stefon Diggs coming into this game, well, he kind of got a little sidelined because of Von Miller, but Stefon Diggs, this was Stefon Diggs week going into the season. And now it's Sean McDermott and Josh Allen and Curtis Samuel and yada, yada this and yada, yada that. And now the Bills are 3-2.
Yeah, it really did overshadow the whole Diggs point of it. It's funny, like this game easily could have been the assessment of the Texans, of a team that hadn't beaten anybody, blowing a lead to a beaten up Bills team and losing. That would have been disastrous for what Houston's trying to build. They got away with it. From the Bills' point of view, though, Houston did do everything they possibly could to give this game away. But the Bills, when you get gifts, you just open them. You don't complain about them. And the Bills did a lot of that in the second half. And there are positive things to take from this game. But big picture, this Bills team is now 3-2. They haven't beaten anybody that's good, unless you count Arizona, who beat the Niners today somehow. And they have a game next week that's for the division lead. And really, the goal for the season might now be less of finishing with a 1 seed or any lofty expectations, and just making sure you stay ahead of the Jets and Dolphins, because if you can't do that, then the season's shot. Because I think we've seen now that at least the team, the way it's constituted right now, is not going to hang with the Baltimores and Houstons of the world, even though this game was close. Now, look, let's dive into the strategy part of it here, and let's just go from the end and work our way backwards. First, with the end of the final play defensively, where Sean McDermott and the Bills, Sean McDermott said they did not have the proper defense in right away. There was a miscommunication. Dorian Williams wasn't ready to go. Look, I know there's going to be a lot of talk about that. Maybe not a lot of talk, because there are other things that are worth more talk. But to me, when you're asking a team to prevent another team from gaining 1 yard or 2 yards or 3 yards, when that team has all their timeouts so they can use the entirety of the field, I mean, you got to basically guess right. And if you guess wrong, you're going to make the field goal so easy, it's a waste of time. So I don't know if there's anything the Bills could do there. And yeah, it looks kind of bad. They didn't have the right defense in. Rasul Douglas said he thought there were 10 people on the field. As you proved on Twitter, there were not. There were certainly 11 guys on the field, but they weren't ready to go. So there's a little bit of coaching malpractice there. But I think at the end of the day, you're probably not winning that scenario anyway.
I mean, you have to stop them one time. I don't want to make it seem like, it's impossible to, you can definitely win that scenario. Like, let's not just give them 5 yards. Certainly not a great look to not have the defense ready. That's problem number one, because you can kind of imagine the type of personnel you want out on the field when the punt team is out there. You should have your 11 guys ready to go. Be like, okay, we're going to imagine they're going to get the ball at around the 50-yard line. These are the 11 guys we want out there. Let's push them out there. You should have those guys ready to go. And I think the big thing that is getting discussion right now on, amongst Bills fans on social media, things like that, is the decision to put your two safeties on the other side of the 20-yard line, when seemingly the Texans only need to get, about 5 yards to kick this field goal. I don't have a big issue with that. The Bills rushed one. They had 8 guys in that sweet zone of the field goal block unit. I don't have a problem with, those safeties being all the way back there, because you don't want to create a situation where a guy just gets open deep and you're not thinking about it and he goes for the touchdown. The issue is that, the running back is in there to chip it first. Nobody's there. He releases and there's nobody near him. How do you have 8 guys for 5 players and one of them is wide open. That's the biggest issue for me, not the safeties being all the way back in the end zone practically.
I agree. I mean, how close do you want to play the safeties? I mean, do you want to bring them to 10 yards to fit? I mean, 5 yards? Do you want to put all 10 guys right there? Because like you said, they'll just throw it over their head and score. So yeah, I don't see, I think the defensive call, and I haven't seen the overhead, but if they went one rusher and 8 guys basically in a 3 to 5 yard zone, that sounds like the right play to me. Because if you can get Stroud to think about it for 2 or 3 or 4 seconds, you might just run the clock out there anyway. So again, I'm not going to get too bent on a shape with how that particular play was defended. And as it turned out, the Kaimi Fairburn field goal was going to be good from 63 or whatever anyway, as long as it was between the uprights. So I don't think there was much the Bills could have gained, or obviously the Bills, like you said, could have done better. But it's probably an unlikely scenario that you defend that play well enough to prevent the field goal. Obviously, the one that is more a strategical discussion is what happens immediately prior to the punt, which is the 3 pass plays in the end zone. And look, or from the near the end zone. I will say this. I don't think there's a hard and fast correct way to play that. If you run it 3 times, then yes, the Texans burn all their timeouts, but run plays are generally shorter. So instead of giving them the ball with 7 or 8 seconds left, you probably give them the ball with 14 seconds left. And then they might still have the entirety of the field to use, because generally you can get a spike done in less than 12 seconds. So I don't think just flat out running it 3 times would have been better. I think what you had to do there was get a first down. And if you want to argue that the Bills running the ball for this particular game was the right call, I can hear that. But in general, if the game's on the line and I need a play to be made, I want Josh Allen to have the ball in his hands, not James Cook, no matter how many yards he's run for.
Yeah, I would have ran the first time just to get a little bit of cushion, ideally, because, people seem to assume that running the ball 3 times is going to work perfectly in hindsight. Derrick Henry got a 2-yard loss for a safety today, and Derrick Henry and the Ravens are a lot better football team than running, a lot better team running the football than the Bills are. People are currently assuming that everything is going to go picture perfect rosy when we run the ball 3 times. That's not going to happen to the Bills every single time. I mean, this was basically, the worst case scenario with passing the ball 3 times, except for a turnover and, holding in the end zone. There's some other stuff, but the ball was incomplete 3 times, and they needed a 59-yard field goal to win this game, which, still would have been, I don't want to say it would have been good from 65, but maybe like 62, 63. But it took a hell of a kick to beat this team with what they ended up doing. I would have personally, run the ball the first down, give myself a little bit more cushion for holding in the end zone. That was the biggest thing I was worried about when they were dropping back, was the holding in the end zone causing a safety. And then the passes themselves, the first one was, Keon Coleman in a one-on-one scenario. I mean, that's why you drafted him. That might be your best option to get a guy open. So I don't have a big problem with that. The second down play call, when Matt Collins goes deep, Josh is looking at the entire way. I did not like that decision. There are 2 guys in more intermediate routes that seemed to be open when he completed his drop back. Granted, the play seemingly was A1 designed for Matt Collins, so Josh wasn't really looking there. And then, third down was kind of somewhat more of a middle play. Obviously, it didn't work. So I have more of an issue with the pass plays that they called than the decision to pass themselves.
There was a thought I had in the field. Would it have made sense for Josh to run around for 3 or 4 seconds in the end zone and then just heave the ball as far as he could towards some guy 50 yards downfield? Tell your receiver, look, just make sure the other team doesn't catch it, and you'll run a few more seconds off the clock, and you might be able to get to overtime that way. I mean, that might have been as good a play as what they did or anything else someone's throwing out. Again, I don't think you have an easy answer there. I think you've got a very reasonable objection about, let's nitpick's the wrong word, but let's break down each of the 3 passes and say, could you have done something better there? But I will remind you that Josh Allen was 9 of bleeping 30 throwing the ball. So I don't know if there was a good throw. They could have tried one of those classic throws out to the side and let Curtis Samuel run for 0, or the one they did in the second quarter when they did a quick screen to, I don't know, was it the James Cook or Curtis Samuel? So again, it didn't seem like there were many good options in the passing game even if I'm going to say Josh Allen with the ball in his hands is what I want. I just, it's a very unique scenario. The Bills didn't have enough they could lean on to really get out of it. But again, I think when you're not sure, letting Josh Allen pull the trigger is always a fine call. And you're right. I didn't think about the offensive line having a block all that time. I talked to David Andrews about it, or David Edwards, I'm sorry, about it after the game. And he said, yeah, you got to be obviously focused there. But they were just worried about, trying to make the play. You can't really think about it like, oh my God, if I hold, we're going to lose. So I know Bills fans are upset. And when you're upset, you want to point to A or B or C as that's the reason why we lost. I don't, there were other reasons prior to that sequence why they lost this game. And in that sequence, like you said, the end game was Houston getting a 59-yard field goal. And let's not ignore the thing that no one is really seemingly talking about. I haven't lived on Twitter, so who knows? But you could cover the punt better too. I mean, Robert Woods had a 13-yard return of that thing, on top of the 30-yarder he had that led to a field goal in the first half. That was the difference in this game. So we can argue about run, pass. If you cover the punt, or if, you have a better punt, and I don't want to get on Sam Martin, because I thought Sam Martin had a really good game. But there are other things you can do other than should we have ran or should we have passed?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in that scenario, that kind of, I think the punt coverage discussion goes more back to running the ball, because with your punter back so far up, you're in more punt block protection mode than, punt coverage mode. So you're certainly, he catches this ball and there is no one within 18 yards of him.
Yeah,
so,
and Sam Martin's probably into just get it the heck out of here as opposed to trying to hit a good punt.
Yeah, and even with, this longer return, it was still a net 43-yard punt, which isn't terrible for being back at your own 3-yard line. And come to think of it, the longer punt and the longer return buys off more yards than,
or more 40, seconds, you mean?
Yeah, it buys off more seconds than, a 48-yard punt that goes sideways out of bounds or fair caught. The punt itself burned off 9 seconds, which, is a decent amount of time when you only have 16 seconds when you start this punt. So, obviously punt coverage was an issue for, certain plays, but, you can only do so much.
Yeah, and for the record, 43 yards on a net, that's like pretty much the league average for a net. So when you get a league average punt from your own 3, that's probably a good punt. Real quick, and you texted this question to me and I asked it of Sean McDermott, and it's worth discussing. The Bills had an opportunity to do a 10-second runoff on that ridiculous. If Houston had lost this game and we're doing the Houston podcast, we would talk about the intentional grounding play for an hour. But obviously, we don't have to worry. The Bills did have an opportunity to take a 10-second runoff there, which, as the game turned out, it would have helped. I don't think there's any scenario where you accept that 10-second runoff, because you never know what happens on the punt. You could get a block. Even if you get a touchback, you got it to the 20. There's a lot of reasons to want to save that 10 seconds, as opposed to, well, geez, what happens if they down it on the 2 and now I have to try and hope to have some scenario where they don't make a field goal on me from 60 yards at the end. But, had he accepted the 10-second runoff, the Bills probably at least go to overtime. So was there any problem you had with that?
I did not have a problem with it. If you're going to go the extended, let's just run out the clock, let's, run the ball 3 times, you should have a problem with that, because you want to get to overtime as quickly as possible. That is your mindset. If you're living in this hindsight world, if we should have run the ball 3 times, you also should have had a problem with them not accepting the 10-second runoff. I did not. I was certainly happy with, saving my time, seeing what happens on the punt. They probably weren't going to block it because they were basically in defense. They had Codrington back and they were in defense. So you're not worried about
normal defense. Yeah. I gotcha.
So you're not worried about the block, but obviously the ball could go into the end zone. Somebody, tweeted at me that they were mad at, them for not being in their punt team because, they could have returned the ball. The ball landed at the 3-yard line. You're not supposed to catch that ball anyways. So right. Let's not, invent ways to, criticize the coaching staff. I didn't have a problem with it. The one thing that I will point out, and we talked about this before, is that when Sean McDermott was explaining his, decision-making on whether or not he wanted to accept that 10-second runoff, he seemed to have, the way Abbas can interpret it, seemed to have thought that the 10-second runoff could have then continued the game clock to run, which would have allowed it to go down to 1 second if they had declined the. It was weird. It was hard to decide what McDermott was talking about there, which can be another question mark as to if he fully had a grasp of the situation and all the options at play. Just another thing to kind of point out there, that McDermott was explaining a scenario that both of you and I didn't really think had any, possibility of playing out.
It was, at the end of the day, one of the more unique end of game scenarios that I've ever seen in watching and covering professional football. And it doesn't mean that the coaches get excused for not having the perfect solution to it. I mean, look, one team was going to succeed and one wasn't. Either the Bills were going to force overtime or they weren't. But I really can't sit there and nitpick a decision really for the whole game. You know what's funny? The decision that I didn't like the most, at least when it was made, was the 4th and 5 go for it that turned into a Keon Coleman touchdown. That was the one I had the biggest problem with, and I didn't have that much of a problem with it. I got it. My thinking then was it's midfield. You've got the Texans on the ropes a little bit. Go ahead and punt it down there, let your defense do its thing, and you can come turn around and probably be 1st and 10 anyway. But obviously being aggressive there worked, and it's fine. I think top to bottom, Sean McDermott in terms of game management decisions were good for this game. And yeah, they lost the game, and we're going to get into the reasons why that is in a minute. But I thought this was a very well managed game. And for the NFL, that is not typical for every coach in the world.
And I will just say I had zero problem with them going for it there.
Yeah.
They're down 10, it's 4th and 5 at midfield. I think that's a prime go for it opportunity. So I would have gone for that, 10 out of 10 times there.
And the more I thought about that one too, even if you fail there and the Texans turn it into a field goal, you're still down 2 scores. It'd be different if you were down 7 in that spot or 14 to where the field goal really makes a difference. But yeah, I'm just saying that in the moment I was like, I think I'd punt here. And then they scored. I'm like, okay, fine. That worked out good. And as an underline too, I thought McDermott managed the game pretty well. Now let's get into how the Bills really lost this game, which is Josh Allen, 30 passes, 9 completions. AJ, look, I'm on the field. I didn't see it top to bottom. I can only assume the receivers were pretty terribly not open most of the game. How bad was it from someone watching on TV?
I mean, they certainly weren't open. That's for sure. Josh Allen did not have a good day either. He had the one miss on to
Mac
Dalton
Collins?
to Mac Collins where he went deep. That's kind of a, whose fault is it? Josh Allen for not putting in the right spot and Mac Collins for not tracking it in. Hit his fingertips.
It's a 60-yard throw too. I think people assume those are easier to complete than they are.
Yeah, so I maybe go 70 on Mac just because it hits his fingertips and 30% on Josh for, I didn't exactly see where he was when he threw the ball. But if it was after he got beat, he was so wide open. That's where he kind of put a little more air on it just to let him, kind of field it like an outfielder. And then he obviously misses the, the Dalton Kincaid kind of pass up the seam. So that was another miss. And then
what was the seam ball? It looked to me like the linebacker had decent coverage, though. Was that not accurate?
It seemed to me. I'll see if I can find the play the next time you're talking here. It seemed to me like if he got a little more air put in the right spot, that should be a completion there. And then the worst play of them all is when he tried to do, hero Josh, and he ran over to the right sidelines, was barely out of bounds, threw it to a Houston Texans defender across his body. It was just a terrible play. That was definitely the worst Allen play by far today.
Yeah, that was the one where I thought, he still has not thrown an interception this year, which I guess is credit for Josh Allen. But after that play, I thought if the game is still going the way that it's been going all day, at some point Josh is going to throw an interception, maybe more than one, but the game turned around in the second half. Look, at the beginning of the year and during the offseason, the Bills told us everybody was going to eat, that spreading the ball around was going to be the answer. And you and I have talked multiple times, and I tried to impress it on multiple fans talking about social media that, look, everybody works when you have people who can get open. This is just a team that looks like a group of receivers that are not going to separate. And to me, the guy who was supposed to change that was Curtis Samuel. He was the guy that had the reputation of being a man coverage beater, someone who could get separation, and the guy never plays. And when he does play, he never goes downfield. And this was the offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, who was supposed to know how to use Curtis Samuel. And look, he had turf toe preseason. Fine. First couple games, maybe not ready to go. I get that. There was no Khalil Shakir in this game. They were crying out for someone who you think had Curtis Samuel's skill set. And this was a guy that with Sam Howell last year was reasonably productive. The Bills can't get him on the field. You know what? I've called him Isaiah McKenzie 2.0. You know what he is? He's Nyheim Hines 2.0. This is a good player that comes to Buffalo and they make him into a bad player. And I don't know what the problem is with Curtis Samuel in particular. But beyond that, and now that I'm in full rant, I'm just going to go through the entire group of receivers now. Dalton Kincaid, all right, solid contributor, and maybe we'll develop better down the road. He's not ready to be the Travis Kelce guy. It's just not happening. You know, like there's a seam ball. Maybe that's Josh Allen's fault. There was another play later in the game where it looked like Josh Allen read a blitz, had the ball out quick. Kincaid did not have his head around fast enough, and it goes through his hands. Regardless of all that, if he was this dominant route runner, this physical presence, he would get the ball thrown to his way more often than he does. Keon Coleman, he's a rookie. I don't know what we all expected him to be. I think he's been exactly what we thought he would be coming out of camp. A few big plays here and there, can't separate. Mac Hollins, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, they're supplementary pieces. They're supplementary pieces. They're not guys who are going to drag your passing game to success. Khalil Shakir is the only dependable receiver they have, and when you don't have him, you see what you're left with. You're left with 9 for 30. This group is just not good enough, AJ. And look, they can go out and get Devontae Adams if they want. I think they're going to have to try and find somebody, maybe not necessarily trade for him, but they better be looking because the group we saw today is not going to function anywhere deep into January.
No, and people were talking about, this is what happens when the Bills are missing their wide receiver one. Their wide receiver one was on the other sideline today. It's Stefon Diggs. They did not have a wide receiver one. Khalil Shakir is good. He is fine. He is dependable. But if he's going to be the number one wide receiver on a Super Bowl contending, Super Bowl winning team, you got a lot of problems. You better be surgical Tom Brady with a mastermind and a quick precision passing offense. You better have everything working.
Or you have Derrick Henry at running back too.
Yeah, something like that. You better everything's got to be else perfect if you're going to have Khalil Shakir by your wide receiver one. As you know, our former colleague Carl Jones was talking about on Twitter, if you get that receiver, Devontae Adams and Amari Cooper, everybody slides down one peg. And now you've got Khalil Shakir as your wide receiver too, that's what he probably is right now. Do you even have a wide receiver 3? I don't know. Well, all right, Keon Coleman could be a flashy guy, make some plays. That's fine for a wide receiver 3. And then everybody else, wide receiver 4, fine, great. Matt Collins, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Curtis Samuel if he shows up, if they know how to use him. Now you've got a unit that looks like an NFL unit should be, but that was the thing, like you said, this everybody eats, and maybe they thought Dalton Kincaid was going to be the wide receiver 1. They certainly thought Curtis Samuel was going to be a heck of a lot more productive than he was, because this wasn't an Isaiah McKenzie, no investment into this guy. This wasn't even Deontay Hardy. They gave him a little bit of money, but they didn't really give him a lot of money last year. Curtis Samuel was their free agent answer at wide receiver. This was a guy who, you bring in, you give him a quarterback, you put him with Joe Brady, a guy who's worked magic with him before. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can play in the slot. Today he had -1 total yards. -1. So
Reggie Bush level.
Exactly. There's not much more you can say about that.
For the record, Curtis Samuel signed a 3-year, $24 million contract. There was an outlay of cash to this guy and an intention to use him, better than the Bills, or certainly more often than the Bills have used him. And, look, I think Josh Allen said it's only one game. And I think we're still too early in the season. I like that my line is Halloween for when you really know what you got in the NFL. So these receivers could develop, things could get better. It's still possible. But one of the reasons I rant like this is because even when the passing game of the offense was going good and the Bills were scoring 30 points a game, there wasn't a ton of separation if it wasn't schemed open. Against Jacksonville, there's a reason why we talked about Joe Brady, until the cows came home, because the scheming, the X's and O's were what was getting these receivers open. At least it appeared that way. And what we've seen the last 2 weeks makes it further appear what worked the first 3 weeks was not the receivers individually. So give credit to Joe Brady, but at some point, unless your offensive coordinator is one of the rare couple of elite guys, at some point the players play and the coaches coach, and the players just aren't playing well enough for the Bills. Now, I do want to say one thing positive about the offense. I thought the line was better today. I know that there were certainly spurts of pressure on Josh Allen. I thought late second quarter through the third, early fourth, one of the main reasons the Bills were coming back other than the fact that the Texans were machine gunning themselves in the feet in this game, was that the Bills' offensive line was better than the Texans' offensive line. The Bills were giving Josh Allen time to throw. The Bills were opening holes for the run game. And the Bills' defensive line was getting, at least bothering CJ Stroud. They weren't really getting to him, but they were certainly harassing, hurrying up, that kind of thing.
Early it was rough on the pass rush.
Very much so.
It got better as the game went along.
The first quarter, I thought Josh Allen was not going to survive the game. And then, like I said, second, third, early fourth, the Bills' O-line was better than the Texans' O-line. Now, it wasn't as good as what we saw the first 3 weeks, but it was a heck of a lot better than what we saw last week against Baltimore. And it gives me optimism that if the Bills can ever figure out the skill position stuff, and whether that means just getting Shakir back, developing other players, pulling off a big-time trade, if the offensive line was going to play like it did against Baltimore all year, then the whole thing was shot. Just flush the season down the toilet. That didn't happen. The O-line improved. They gave Josh Allen time. They paved the way for the comeback. And I wanted to at least, provide those flowers when they were appropriate.
Yeah, and I will just say, touching back on Shakir, like you mentioned about him coming back, I mean, he didn't practice all week with an ankle injury. Was never really an option to play in this game. That's not going to be, even if he plays next week, he's probably not going to be 100%. I don't care how much painkillers you shoot up that ankle with. So it's going to be a game or two before you get back to what, especially a player like Shakir, who is, route running and, staying on his feet as like 90% of the plays that he makes is being able to stay up and make things happen after the catch. You're probably not going to get 100% Khalil Shakir for a couple of weeks, and who knows how long this lingers.
All right, let's move to the defensive side of the ball. First quarter looked like they didn't belong on the same field, but Rasul Douglas said later that, both the touchdowns he said were mental mistakes, and he got into the Nico Collins deep ball a little bit. Didn't say specifically who did the wrong thing, but basically, me and Cole Bishop were not on the same page. And one thing, going back to our old colleague Carl Jones, who's very smart, is why we bring him up all the time. One of the things he always says when you play defensive back is that if we're all wrong, then we're all right. The only goal is to be on the same page. And on that play, Rasul Douglas and Cole Bishop were not on the same page. But after that, the Bills only allowed 9 points the rest of the game. And look, Nico Collins not playing was a huge part of that. But the Bills are missing like 85 guys on defense. I'm not going to cry over the one really good receiver Houston was missing. I thought that part of the way the defense played in the second half was underlining how good Christian Benford and Rasul Douglas are. In that, if you take Nico Collins out and it's only Stefon Diggs and Tank Dell, the Bills are better on the outside in that situation. And to me, it felt like it showed up that way because the only time the Texans really moved the ball in the second half were Dalton Schultz plays. So, good on the Bills for showing that if you don't have an elite guy, whether it be last week Derrick Henry running the ball or this week Nico Collins catching the ball, our defense, no matter what pieces we run out there, are going to be a pain in your neck.
Yeah, and certainly you talk about, those two outside cornerbacks being able to lock down, the Texans' two receivers. Once you put Taron Johnson back in there, you've now got 3 very plus players on the outside and in that slot where you can definitely have a lot more wiggle room with your safeties and your linebackers and your defensive line, things like that. When you have, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the league's cornerbacks, but 3 really darn good guys who could probably go toe for toe with, anybody on the 2 outside and the cornerback. It makes up for a lot of holes on your defense. That's for sure.
All right, let's look ahead here and kind of big picture this game. 3-2. I think the concern is the Bills fall to 3-3. Let's separate the idea of where they are in the division. Let's just talk about 3 wins and then 3 losses, what that would be. You would have a Bills team that you'd have to wonder until we got to like the Kansas City, San Francisco portion of the schedule, whether they can beat someone who's legit if they lose next week to the Jets. So that concern is still sitting out there because they haven't beaten a good team yet this year. That said, if you win next week, you'll have your win against a pseudo good team. We'll see what the Jets are. But more importantly, you would probably have a 2-game lead in the division with tiebreakers to where, yes, you might have issues that are going to need some serious surgery between now and January. But if you win next week, the path to January gets pretty darn wide. So to me, yeah, these last 2 games look bad, except for the second half of this Texans game when Houston was missing an elite receiver. But you win next week and things will get mostly back on track for the Bills.
Yeah, certainly. I think you have to go back and recalibrate yourself to the expectations we had when all these moves were made in the offseason. Win the division, see what the heck happens in the playoffs. And right now they're in a good position to win the division. Obviously they have to, get their heads out of their butts to be able to do that. But if they kind of rewrite the course, I think a division title is well within their reach. And then you just figure out what happens in the playoffs. It's a lot of coin flips out there. So, guys will get back, guys will come back. Taron Johnson's coming back. We're pretty sure Matt Milano's coming back. Von Miller's coming back. Obviously, before that happens, more guys could come hurt because this is the NFL and things, don't become that great. But I think it's kind of just the Bills are who we thought they were going into this season. And that's where they kind of stand right now.
You took the Dennis Green quote right out of my mouth. That's exactly where I was going. We talked about the Bills taking a small step back. They're probably still win the division. They're not quite the Super Bowl team, the contender they were the past few years. And after 5 weeks, it's exactly what they looked like. And next week will be to cement that status as the class of the division. And look, they can still lose to the Jets and win the division. I wouldn't advise it because the Jets' rest of the season schedule is much easier than the Bills' season schedule. At least that's how it looks. But next week is not going to be the playoff determining game. It's just an opportunity for the Bills to come out, kind of cement themselves as the team on top. Anything else in this game? Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to just point out when I say, kind of win the division, see what the heck happens. That doesn't mean they can't go on a run. I mean, if you get healthy and you have quarterback play, that might be the two biggest determining factors of success in the playoffs. So if they can get their guys healthy, if Josh Allen can still be Josh Allen, who we didn't even talk about the massive, hit that he took, it seems like he's all right, but certainly that's going to be something that we watch going forward this week.
A funny situation with that, by the way. So Josh Allen goes in the blue medical tent. They look at him for a little while. The Bills doctor and the red hat, the NFL neutral doctor, pop out. And then nothing happens in the blue medical tent for like a minute. Then someone comes over and Josh leaves for a minute. But then as he's leaving, they're like, no, you got to go back in. So Josh goes back in the blue medical tent for like a minute. And then finally another Bill staffer runs over and they're like, you're good, buddy. And it's like, come on, Josh, everybody get out, get the helmet on. We're putting him back in the game. So it was, if they had won the game or scored a touchdown, this is of course, after the CJ Stroud fumble, it was a unusual situation in a game that was full of them. AJ, I'll tell you, this is not a legendary game in Bills lore, but man, this was one of the weirder finishes I've ever been around.
And you bring up another coaching talking point or, decision point, which I don't think was that big of a deal in the moment, but certainly in hindsight, Josh Allen is almost trying to run on the field at that moment. Do you call one of your timeouts and let him, become the quarterback of that play is certainly another thing you can kind of, think about looking back. Who knows whether or not you need those timeouts in a more, meaningful place down the line. But certainly you can have a discussion about whether or not you call that timeout and get Josh Allen back there.
100%. I had the same thought. I think end of the day, they were running the ball well enough that you can trust Mitch Trubisky to hand it off once and see what happens. But it was definitely a thought I had on the sideline.
And I will just say that was a play where everybody knew they were running the ball and they got 0 yards. So let's not pretend that those runs at the end of the game were totally going to work. And
I looked this up. I didn't have a chance to say it. The Bills' previous 3 runs before the final 3 plays of the game were for 0, 2, and 2 yards. So it wasn't like the run game most immediately recently was working that well. All right. I think we have exacerbated our thoughts on this one. As always, you can watch and listen to Buffalo Game Day Recap at rochesterfirst.com. Click on the 8 Sports Extra tab. You can check us out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Next week, we go back to night games. This sweet 1 p.m. start out the window once again. Bills and the Jets on Monday night. AJ and I will have our late night chat, and you can catch us Tuesday next week for what will now be a very, very large divisional clash. Thanks for watching and listening. For AJ Feldman, I'm Thad Brown. We'll see you next week.